at some point in a PhD, you have to like propose what your dissertation is going to be. And I was sort of stuck between two choices. And I spent like a whole summer, like really, really miserable over not knowing how to choose. And eventually another professor sat me down and said, listen, you just have to pick. You just pick. There isn't a right answer. And that is like one of the hardest lessons that I have to relearn over and over and over again, is that many times in life, you have to make a choice where there's not an obvious better choice, and you have to just pick and run with it. One of the things that we see that creates problems for a lot of students is a focus on memorizing and procedures rather than on understanding. So a lot of students come through math class and they might ask, like, I understand you're telling me that to divide fractions that I should flip one of them and multiply them. And I kind of don't know why that is. And a lot of the messaging students get is like, well, don't worry about it. This is just how you do it. This is the right way to do it. Or if they try to solve problems creatively, they might be told like, well, you might have gotten the right answer, but this is the wrong way to do it. You have to do it this way. And so lots of students come out of these classes thinking that like math and science is all about memorizing stuff. The way to be good at a class like that is to memorize. That you're a math or a science person. Either you're good at this or you're not, and there's like nothing you can change about it. And so they sort of many students come to view it as this like fixed capability that is really about memory. And people who actually work in math and science know that that is completely the opposite of what it is like to study math and science, that math and science is really about understanding. It's about understanding how ideas and concepts are connected to one another, and using that knowledge to make new inferences about things you haven't, studied or looked at yet. And so a lot of what interests me about effective math and science teaching is a deeper question about, what does it mean to understand things rather than just memorize them? And what can you do to help people understand, right? How can you teach in a way that fosters that kind of thinking, that makes students want to think in that kind of way, that can evaluate thinking in that way? So that's what motivates me about it. My focus of research is not to say that I think humanities or arts are not worth studying. I just think that they're studied in a different way, and people don't come to them with the same kinds of assumptions that get in the way of their own learning. So it does fall a lot on teachers and tutors to communicate to students expectations and beliefs about how their field works, right? Part of what we teach you in class is not just the material, but we teach you ways of thinking about things. And so teachers are often responsible for communicating to students what matters is the right answer and not your ability to explain it, right? Because think of all the tests you take that are multiple choice, where the point is pick the right answer, right? And not, can you explain to me how you know this is the right answer? So some of it falls on the teachers to set the expectation about what's going to count. Some of it can fall on students, that if you have this belief that we would call a growth mindset, where you say to yourself, like, I know that I'm capable of learning this, right? The fact that I'm struggling right now, it's not a sign that I'm not a math person. It's a sign that I need to study a little bit more, right? That I can become better the more that I do. When you embrace messaging like that, it can really shift your perspective and how you feel about the feedback you get, right? The feeling of doing poorly on a quiz or a test varies a lot depending on what you think that means. If you think a low grade on a test or a quiz means I'm not smart, I'm not good enough for this, I'm not cut out for this, that's so disheartening, right? Of course you would feel like, well, maybe this shouldn't be my major. Maybe I shouldn't be in college. Maybe I shouldn't take hard classes, right? But if instead you get a low grade on an assignment and you say, man, I still have a lot to learn, that's a very different feeling of saying like, okay, this is feedback to me that I'm getting there, but I have more to learn. Let me go back and say, what didn't I understand? How can I understand it better? How can I apply that going forward? And so I think it comes from both places, that teachers are responsible to some extent about structuring their classes in a way that rewards that kind of thinking, giving students opportunities to revise work or have a second shot at something, which is something I try to include in my classes. But students can do it too, right? If you are like willing to embrace the idea that you can grow your own knowledge, you can grow your capability, and you can grow your interest in things too, right? That things you don't enjoy at first, you can come to enjoy by working hard on them. If you embrace that kind of belief, it really changes the way that you respond to critical or negative feedback. What are grades for? What are they going to be used for? What's the point of them? Students are rational human beings, and they know that like grades are used to evaluate people, and they're going to impact things like admissions to graduate school. Like I can't stand here or sit here and tell you that's not true, right? But I think what students sometimes miss is that grades are not for many things in life. Grades are not for determining your income after you graduate. They are not for your career choice after you graduate. They are not for all the other things that you do in life that make life enjoyable and a fun experience. And so when I've had conversations with students who are feeling really stressed out about, I always got straight A's in high school and now I'm getting B's and I feel like I'm like doing really poorly and what can I do to get an A? I really need an A. I think what students really need is some validation that what they're doing is worth it and that they belong. And I encourage students to think about, what if this class didn't have grades? What would you be getting out of it? Right? Besides what's on your transcript, what are you going to walk away with from this class? How is it changing you as a person and making you more thoughtful or more well-rounded or giving you a new perspective on something? Because 10 years from now, 20 years from now, that's what you're going to remember, right? Like I don't remember the grades that I got in various classes, but I do remember we read this really amazing book in this class, or like this is the class when I first learned about, this period in history that I never knew anything about, and it totally shifted my understanding of like this societal issue. And I'm not saying that like you're going to get that out of Calc 2, right? But you might in Calc 2 develop an understanding of like, wow, this is really interesting that you can think about a system and how a system changes, and understanding the relationship between those things can help you like make better predictions, or it has applications to like business decisions. Or I would encourage people at the end of every quarter, honestly, to reflect on, what did I get out of this besides my transcript? And being intentional about that, I think just it makes everything feel a little bit more like I'm not just here to get a number, to get my GPA and get out. I'm here to like develop my intellectual world. And I'm the person I'm going to be living with the rest of my life, right? What am I doing and exposing myself to in college so that I'm an enjoyable person to be around inside my own head? Part of what was really hard about starting grad school was feeling like the implicit rules of undergrad didn't apply anymore. So in undergrad, a lot of people figure out the rules are like, well, you take classes, you get the best grade you can, and you do that by like going to class and reading and then like memorizing what they've told you to learn, right? And those rules kind of go away in a PhD, where suddenly you take classes, but your grades in those classes don't matter, right? Or they matter only as much as you pass the class. Nobody cares about a GPA in grad school anymore. And the point of grad school is not to like repeat back what professors have told you, but to generate new knowledge. And that's really hard to do. And it made me really nervous about like, who am I? Who am I to say this or to make this claim? I haven't read all the literature. It's impossible to read the entire literature. So how can I possibly like contribute to this? So there's a lot of that fear of like, who am I to be doing this? Another hurdle was when I started grad school, the advisor that I started with, the lab I was in, I was pretty excited about. And this person hadn't applied directly to work with them, but they saw my application and said, oh, I think you would really like what we're doing. Here's some papers. And I felt very much like, oh, wow, like, oh, they want to work with me. This is cool. So I worked in their lab when I started, and it turned out that it was just not a good fit, that the research was interesting, but not super motivating to me. And the working style, I felt like I wanted more close contact and mentorship, and this person wanted me to be more independent. And it led to a lot of conflict that was really uncomfortable, where I felt like I was being reprimanded for asking for things, and they felt like I was not taking initiative to do enough on my own. And that was really hard. And I was really unhappy. So this was like at the start of my second year, I was like really unhappy. And I had gone to a different professor just to ask for recommendations about reading, like what are some papers I should read for this next project. And in that meeting, he said, like, you seem unhappy. Like, how are things going? And I described what was happening. And he was like, well, why don't you just switch to work with me? And I was like, oh, is that allowed? Like, I don't even know. Can I do that? I like burst into tears. And so I had to, like, in my second year, well, I didn't have to. I decided to switch advisors. And then I had to have like a really uncomfortable conversation and to like sit down my advisor and say, I don't want to work in your lab anymore. Here, I'm going to switch. Here's what's going to happen. That was really hard. That was one of the hardest moments of grad school, was to realize that something I had chosen was not what I wanted, and I needed to make a new choice. And it was scary, but it was also like amazing once I made that switch. And I was so much happier after making that decision. And then the rest of grad school, like, my new advisor, like, it was a great relationship, but I still suffered a lot of the same like anxiety and imposter syndrome of like, well, who am I to say this? And am I really good enough? Like, is my writing good enough to publish this paper? And at some point in a PhD, you have to like propose what your dissertation is going to be. And I was sort of stuck between two choices. And I spent like a whole summer, like really, really miserable over not knowing how to choose. And eventually another professor sat me down and said, listen, you just have to pick. You just pick. There isn't a right answer. And that is like one of the hardest lessons that I have to relearn over and over and over again, is that many times in life, you have to make a choice where there's not an obvious better choice, and you have to just pick and run with it. And so that was how I got through it. Was I was choosing between doing a dissertation about the role of explanation and understanding versus, or like a topic on learning from instructional video. And I just picked instructional video. And now it's what I do. And by investing a lot of time and thinking about it and studying it, I've come to like really love that. And I haven't had to give up my interest in explanation, but that was a hard thing. And I imagine many students are faced with choices like that a lot, where it's not obvious what the best answer is. You just pick. But I think that, those two experiences of like having to make a choice and then also having to make a new choice when something was not going well, that has shaped a lot about what I think of as like my ability to be resilient, is to just know that like, okay, I'm going to make the best choice I can. If it doesn't go well, I can make a new choice. It's hard sometimes and it's uncomfortable sometimes, but I am able to make a new choice. There are a couple of ways to think about it. One is, if you are sitting with uncertainty about like, I don't know if I'm going to like this, finding ways to try it ahead of time are really useful. So this is one of the reasons when I meet students who tell me I'm thinking about applying to graduate school in psychology, that I say it would be really worth it to get some lab experience before you go, so that you have a feeling of what it's like to do this. Because things that sound great in the abstract can feel really terrible when you actually have to do them, right? Like, research in the abstract is like, cool, I get to think about things and like come up with new knowledge. And then when you're actually doing the work and you're like, oh my God, I don't know anything. This is horrible. How does anybody know anything? Right? If you don't know what that process is like, then it's of course very scary to apply to grad school. So if you're able to get an internship or volunteer in a lab, or get some kind of hands-on experience, even just shadowing somebody for a day or a week, I think that's really helpful. I had a lot of anxiety in grad school when I was thinking about what kind of career do I want? Like, do I want to be in academia? Do I want to go into industry? And one thing I did was have informational interviews. So I reached out to people I knew and said, do you know anyone who'd be willing to talk to me about what it's like to work at a tech company, or what it's like to work at, a research firm that's not like an academic institution? And I had phone calls with them and just said like, what's a typical day like? How does it feel to like bill your hours? What do you enjoy about this position? What do you dislike about it? And just like asking people about that kind of thing, because that was the number one thing that bugged me, was how can I know if I would like something if I don't even know what the day-to-day would be? And so asking people, I think, is really helpful. But at some level, right, a lot of things are unknowable. And even with all that information gathering, it's still impossible to know what things feel like until you're in there. And so one way of dealing with it is you might reflect on times in your own life where you've made a transition like that. Like think back to when you were in high school and you were imagining what college would be like. And how does college feel different than what you imagined it might be, right? And reflect on how you navigated that change, because that's a change you're going to experience many times. When you start a new job, when you move to a new place, if you ever start a family or get in a serious relationship, those are all things that you can imagine. You can imagine up, up and down, but once you're actually in them, feel different. And so this is a long way of me saying, like, you've already been through many changes where there was a lot of uncertainty, and have a little faith in yourself that you could navigate those and you'll get through this too. All these feelings are temporary. Once you leave a system that has built-in brakes, you have to build in your own brakes. Like, it's really, really hard to work crazy hard all the time. Nobody can do it. And so you have to build in your brakes. And you might be the kind of person who wants to work crazy hard all year and take a whole month off. You might be the kind of person who wants to work crazy hard for 6 hours a day and then have a couple hours off every day, or some combination of those things, or something in between, right? But nobody can work crazy hard all the time with no breaks and expect to be okay mentally. So I think, like, I struggle with this too, how to build in breaks for myself. But one of the things I decided this year was that instead of teaching both summer sessions, I was going to take one of them off and just won't teach during summer session too, which feels weird because it feels like a thing I'm supposed to do. I've been doing it. It feels weird to stop. But I think it's also really necessary to give yourself time to rest. If you never do that, it'll catch up to you. I do think something I wish I had done in college, because it turns out it's hard to do this as an adult with a career, is studying abroad. I had a study abroad experience in high school, which was like super privileged of me. That when I was 16, I lived with a family in Spain for 3 months, and it was an amazing experience. But I was 16, and so I didn't get the study abroad, like, country hop around the continent you're on kind of experience. And I kind of wish that I had done that, because there's a certain amount of freedom when you are college aged that goes away as you have more responsibilities as an adult. And I did get to do some traveling. So I was in grad school, I was presenting at a conference in Berlin. Like, I was in a program that was willing to, or that was able to cover the cost of presenting in Berlin. And so I took extra time to travel with a friend in Europe then, but kind of wish I had studied abroad. I also am just like a mega nerd, and there are all kinds of classes I wish I had taken. And my plan right now is when I retire, I'm going to audit all these classes, and I'll be like the 70-year-old in the back of the classroom or the front row being like, I want to take micro econ because I never took it before and I want to know what it's about. Or like, I want to take comparative religion because I never took it before and I want to know more about it. So there is definitely a part of me that's like, oh, I wish I took this class. I wish I took that class. I wish I did this thing. But all the things I did choose, were part of what brought me to where I am. And so I don't particularly regret those choices. You're going to have a long life and a long career, like, statistically speaking. We can't predict the future, but there are lots of folks who, I think the norm these days is for adults to have 3 careers in their life, right? That it is extremely normal to do one thing for a long time and then decide I want to do something else. And so you might have limited time, like in this college right now, but you have a long time to pursue the things that interest you and matter to you over the course of your life. And there is room to make new choices in the decades to come. You are here for more than a GPA. What are you getting out of this college experience besides a GPA? And the reason that's my advice is that I think a longer term perspective helps alleviate some of the anxiety around grades. And there's anxiety about grades at lots of schools. I think it's especially true here. I see it in a lot of students here, this like fear of not getting good enough grades or being judged, that I'm not smart enough if I don't get good enough grades, which I just think is not true. But like, it's not, I can't convince you of that. I think you have to embrace that for yourself. But what I do think I can convince you of is that there's something else besides the grade that you can get out of every class. Even a class you really dislike, what are you learning from that experience, right? Maybe you're learning, what is it about this class that I really dislike? I had classes that I really didn't like as a student, but I learned, like, well, what I don't like about this class is that I feel like we are not digging deeper into the information, right? That I don't like this class because lectures are just repeating what's in the book. I don't feel like I'm getting more out of it than I would from reading. I learned that from that class, right? Biological anthropology. um, and it's not anything against the topic. It was just like, well, that's part of what I learned. In another class, maybe I really liked the topic, but I didn't do as well on papers as I normally do. And so what did I get out of that class? I got out of it like, oh, I have more to learn about how to write effectively, right? What did I get out of this class? Like the importance of going to office hours, right? And making connections with people. So some of what you get out of a class is going to be relevant for your life. I learned things in psychology courses that are relevant to me doing the research I do and teaching in the way I do. But I also learned a lot about how knowledge is structured and how people communicate effectively and how important relationships are and how to teach effectively. And those are things that shape how I do my job now, right? Things that I learned in classes that are totally unrelated to psychology. That physics class taught me a teaching technique that I use in all my classes now. So you can't predict at this point where you're going to be 10 years from now, but you can start thinking about, what am I getting out of college besides a GPA? And focusing on that, I think, makes people feel better about what they're doing and how they're spending their time and the value of it.
Thanks for watching. Hit the like button and comment with your own thoughts and experiences. If you'd like to see more content like this, please subscribe to our channel at ReLyfe Videos. Let's rehumanize.